Hello and welcome back after a long hiatus on my end to season 5 of the Runners Roundtable podcast, where this season we're talking about hot takes, hot topics that I want to dive deeper into and hopefully explore more with the guests that come onto the podcast to talk to me. This week or this episode, we're going to be talking about tapering, and the episode title is Taper Crazies because I want to get into what that name means and why we even call it Taper Crazies. But the guest for this episode is Dr. Victoria Sekely. You are a PT, and I actually found out about you from our mutual friend, Amanda Katz. And she was like, you need to ask her to be on the show because whenever I'm trying to figure out what women I can bring onto the podcast, I usually go back to the women that I know and say, hey, who do you know? Who would like to be on the podcast? Who would make for a fun guest? And she immediately recommended you. And I've heard you speak on her podcast and I follow you. So there's always this weird moment of like, I feel like I know you, but I don't. So I want to welcome you to the podcast and give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to us and tell us a little bit about how you got started in running and if you feel comfortable sharing where you're at with running right now.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on here. And obviously, shout out to Amanda Katz. She's truly the best. So, love that connection and also just love all the connections that we have through social media these days. I feel like we can find this really cool, fun community, especially in like the running world. So, very happy to be here and to talk about all of the things taper crazies. A little bit more about me. As you mentioned, I'm a physical therapist, I'm a run coach, I'm a strength coach. I have my own business, Train Smart, Run Strong. And yeah, I got into running quite a long time ago. And it's been a source of a lot of just like, stress relieving for me. It's been an extremely good way for me to almost like reconnect to, this sounds kind of crazy, but like reconnect to my brain. Like I feel like it's one of the few times throughout the day, especially now that we have so much accessibility to our cell phones and to our laptops and all of that, it's like one of the few times that the phone is away and I just like I mean I do listen to music. I'll be open about that, which is honestly one of like the best parts of running for me. But in terms of like scrolling and like thinking about different things that happen throughout the day, running is really such a good time to quiet all of that. And in turn, I find like so many of my best creative ideas come from that time. So I think it's just like one of those reminders that, if you don't have something like that in your life, that can be really helpful to at least just like put the phone. It doesn't have to be running. And I think this is important when it comes to injuries. A lot for when times when you can't run, to have some sort of outlet or to have designated time when you're like, I'm putting my phone and technology away for 30 minutes and I'm just going to sit and be. And I think that that's extremely powerful. So that part of running for me is really what has kept me in it for so long. And currently, I like that you asked that question, like currently, where are you at with running? Because like, whew, I feel like the last 5 years since really being on social media, having an audience and having people, follow my running journey so much more closely, it has really been a lot of ups and downs. Like I would say before social media, it was the same. Like I would just go out, go for my run, got what I needed to done, happy with it, check mark, moving on. Last 5 years, it's been lots of highs and lots of lows. And I'm grateful for it. Don't get me wrong, but it's definitely made things a little bit more complicated on my end and my relationship with running that I've had to re-examine for many different reasons. So currently, I'm coming out of kind of like a downslope, like a negative period with running. I started therapy, which was really helpful for a year. For the past year, I've been doing therapy, and I've just been really, again, like reconnecting with my original why and my original reason for running, while also trying to blend my future with running, which is really that I do now have specific goals that I want to reach, and the blending of the two is what has been complicated, but I feel I'm moving forward in a positive way. So
Yeah, and I think that highlights an often overlooked part about running is the mental component to
oh
running and how
yes,
we identify not only with the sport, but as runners. It's not
100%.
just like I always think I like there's so much through the conversations I've had with people on the podcast where I used to be one of those people that thought, oh, just put some shoes on and go out the door and run. And it's like, no, it's not that simple. That is part of it, but there's this whole inner dialogue that happens on what does it mean to be a runner? And are you a runner if you run at the back of the pack? Are you a runner if you take walk breaks? Are you a runner if you're injured and not able to run at the moment? Are you a runner if you only run once a week, right? Like there's so much to it. And that's not even going to, are you a runner if you don't look like a runner, right? Like, which is an even bigger category. And it's probably just a testament for you of your longevity in sport and how long you've been a runner that now you are in this space and hopefully it's a positive one of redefining what does it mean to be a runner and how to allow the goals to coexist with
Yeah.
that changing definition without it being good or bad. It just is,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, social media definitely makes it challenging because it almost feels like people care what you're doing with running, where it's like they care, but only momentarily, right? Like they don't
Right.
really care at all.
100%. 100%. Yeah. Yeah. I think it was really for me, it's just like realizing that I personally need to disconnect from, it's good to set goals, but it really the trick is goals plural, right? It shouldn't be one specific goal and that's a time-based goal and it's like your happiness is riding on this one goal. Like that is where I think a lot of my issues have kind of started from. And it's really opened my eyes, not just as an athlete, but also as a coach myself. Because I would never be as negative to an athlete than I am to myself. And so getting to be a coach has been almost like one of the most positive experiences for myself because I have to check myself with how I speak to myself a lot of the time. Like I love all of my athletes and there's no such thing as like a good pace or a bad pace or the right
Hmm.
pace or the wrong pace. There just is, right? And
Hmm.
I think a lot of the times, because I'm a physical therapist, I work with a lot of athletes who are injured and things like that. And I feel like I have to, a lot of the time, almost like put my own ego aside to see, to almost like take my own advice because so much of the time it's like, oh, well, I told an athlete like, hey, you can just take a rest day. And then I don't take my own advice sometimes when I'm like, oh, well, I'm tired, all this stuff. Okay, maybe I should just, but it also helps me empathize a little bit too, because I'm like, I understand. I understand what all of my athletes are going through because I've gone through it and I've said that to myself too. But it's a really fun experience for that reason too. It's like, lots of checks happening and I wouldn't have grown as, a person had I not set these goals, had I not failed at these goals, had I not, almost been too hard on myself. So I can't like regret that, but I also, sometimes struggle to move past it. So I think the two can be same at once.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the beauty of being a human, right? Where we can
Yeah,
have these coexisting at odds
absolutely.
experiences at one time. And I'm like snapping and just like, jazz hands over here because I think the same in terms of I often tell my athletes, hey, I'm telling you what I need to hear myself. So like it's
Yes.
not that I'm any better and it
Right.
may sound revolutionary to you,
Yep.
actually it's what I need to tell myself. And
100%.
that's hey, everyone, a reminder that your run coach is a runner too, right? Like, and
And a
we are
human, and a
struggling with the
human.
same stuff. We are
Yeah.
struggling with the same
Yeah.
stuff. So now I have a question for you before we get onto the topic of tapering. Train smart, run strong. What is the not so smart thing that
Yeah.
you feel people are doing in training right now?
In training, we're not talking about taper yet
No, I
specifically.
just want to know, like, as you, because I'm like train smart. I can think of so many examples of not
I
smart
I
training, but I'm
know,
just
I know.
curious on your ends, like, what's something currently that you're like, oh, people, we need to stop. This is not smart.
That's a really good question. And, just like you, I can think of so many different examples. So I want to come up with like a relevant one. I think the most relevant one is ultimately, well, I could go in many different directions. I just thought of like three. I'll say it this way. Periodization is one of the most important and most beneficial things that you can do as a runner. And what that means is you have specific seasons in a calendar year for specific reasons. That doesn't mean you only sign up for one race every season, right? You have free will, you have the ability to do whatever you want. I understand races are really fun and there can be a purpose and a benefit in racing multiple marathons a year, multiple half marathons a year, all of that good stuff. I mean, we could go down that route, but I'll say it just for the sake of nuance in this conversation. However, when I think it crosses the line into not training smart is when you expect to be at your peak performance. Actually, this
Hmm.
will tie really nicely into the taper conversation. When you
Hmm.
expect to be at your peak performance for every race in every season, or you expect to get the benefits from something like strength training when you aren't taking advantage of periodization in a calendar year, which basically means you're probably doing too much. And what I see a lot of the times is like a runner will sign up for a marathon, and the marathon is like 5 months away, right? Which seems like a good amount of time. But maybe you're starting from like you took the last month or 2 months off. So you're starting from you might not be like this might not be the first time you're ever running, but let's say you're starting from like scratch. You took some time off, whatever, 5 months. You start marathon training and at the same time you start a intensive strength training protocol, right? So it's just this idea that you're starting to separate the two, right? Maybe instead of signing up for a marathon 5 months away, you sign up for a marathon 6, 7, 8 months away. You spend the first 2 months really focusing on strength before you dive into a comprehensive, intensive marathon training season, right? And you set that race as a goal race if your goal is to PR or if your goal is to beat a previous time. You can't expect to do that if you're racing all of the time, expecting PRs all of the time. That's a surefire way to burn out. It's a surefire way to plateau. It's a surefire way to increase your risk of injuries. So just be a little bit more uh I don't like the word smart, but have an understanding, even though that's literally my name, have an understanding of like what your goals are. Lay it out. If your goal is to literally like I just want to run races for fun, go out and do it. That's great. I love that for you. Obviously, take rest and like be mindful, but like if your goal is I want to PR in this race and I want to have a goal race on the calendar, be smart about it, right? Don't just like willy-nilly go out there, ramp everything up at the same time and expect to feel your best on race day. So,
Yeah, that's great because I always try to tell people, especially people who want to train for a marathon, I'm like, the more time you have, the better because
period.
you're going to
Yep.
introduce new things. So if strength is something new that you're introducing, it's like you have to give your body the time to adapt to it, to the new routine, even if it's like, I always think of all right, even if you've been running 3 days a week and strength training once, but maybe in marathon training, looking forward, we're looking to add a running day and add a strength training day. So it's like the more time you have to adjust and
Yes.
adapt, then you can grow. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, I see it all the time. And that's always why I tell people, I'm like, the more time you have,
Mm-hmm.
the better,
Yeah.
because it also gives you time to pull back when you need to pull back, right? Like
Exactly.
that's
Exactly.
it.
It doesn't rush things. And when you feel rushed, that's always a recipe for, disaster in many
Mhm.
ways. That's when I see a lot of people feel more stressed out, which increases your risk of injuries, all of that type of stuff. And when you have the time for your body to normalize these things and to get, comfortable with increasing mileage, harder strength workouts, all of that stuff, you're more likely to respond well to it. So,
Yeah. And I think that's so, and it does connect to tapering, right?
yeah.
So, tapering is this period where you are pulling back on intensity, which
Yeah.
is like within the season of training for a race, you have this little
Hmm.
micro season of tapering where you do pull back. And it is a really good parallel for what you're saying of different seasons of running, because it is hard, especially depending on how connected you are to social media and to like the running space. It
Yep.
does feel like you have to be go, 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 go the entire time. So,
Yes.
can you tell us a little bit, in your opinion and your experience, what is tapering and why is it important within a training cycle before a race?
Tapering is a way to basically tilt the odds in your favor that you will show up to race day in peak performance, right? It's a way to collect, for your body to collect all of this input, this stimulus that you've given it as you're building towards a goal race, whether that's increasing mileage, harder speed workouts, harder strength, all of that type of stuff to a certain right, you're building to a certain point. When you're as you're building with all of this stuff, you're also creating a level of fatigue in your muscular system, right? The fatigue is a good thing. The fatigue allows your muscles to grow. But you can't also race your best and feel your best and have your legs feel your lightest on a huge week when you have your highest mileage and you're doing your hardest workouts, right? That's what taper is for. Taper is meant to take those collective build weeks, that entire season of training, and really almost give your body that pause, that rest that it needs to make those changes that you want to see in your muscular system, in your skeletal system, in your cardiovascular system, so that when race day happens, all of those positive stimulus changes have been made. And you have the benefit of not being tired from building all of those. So it's this like, it's not a perfect formula because everyone is different. Everyone experiences change differently. But it is pretty close to what we would want to see from endurance athletes because endurance sports are a big stress on the body that you have to make positive changes, but you can't also build, 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 and the next day after building, race because you haven't given enough time for your body to accept those positive changes and to actually make the changes that we want to see so that you can race appropriately. Does that give a good answer? Did I just make things feel more complicated?
No, no, I think so. You answered what is tapering? Why do we do it? And I think
Yeah.
that's one of the I think the more challenging conversations I have with
Mm,
athletes is the taper period, because they're so
yeah.
used to doing so much
Yeah.
that they don't know how to function when they have to do less.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I wanted to ask you, there's two things that always come up during a taper, I find
Hmm.
in my experience and in talking to people.
Hmm.
One, it's that everything starts to hurt for no reason.
Yep.
And
Yep.
two, there is a lot of doubt of
Yeah.
like, wait, my body hurts. How am I supposed to do? And we're gonna use the marathon right now as an example
Hmm.
because that's the big scary distance that like everyone
Hmm.
freaks out about, right?
Yep.
And so I always hear the, oh my gosh, this injury that I had 10
Yep.
years ago is starting to act up and it hurts. And I don't understand. Like, how did I just go through the season and that 20-mile run and nothing hurt? But now that I'm tapering, everything hurts. So there's one.
Yeah.
And then two, there's the doubt that comes in of, if everything hurts right now and I'm struggling with, a 10-mile run the week
Mhm.
before my race, how am I supposed to get through 26.2 miles?
Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts on those? And then how do you address that either with yourself or with your athletes of the pain that
Mhm.
comes up in the body and then the mental doubt that also
Mhm.
comes up in that?
Yeah. The way that I speak with my athletes about this and also speak with myself about it, because I've been there. I have been the person being like, why is my foot and ankle, like why is my old Achilles injury suddenly popping up? I haven't felt it the whole training cycle. What the heck is going on? Oh my gosh, crying, all of this stuff. There is scientific reasoning for why this is happening. When you are tapering, like I just mentioned, your body is spending a lot of energy on rebuilding your muscular system, on rebuilding your skeletal system after you just pushed hard in those build weeks, which creates this level of, okay, your body's now working really hard to rebuild. It's spending a lot of energy doing that, which is why a regular 10-mile run is not going to feel great. And that's exactly why you're not racing on the day that you would run that 10-mile run in taper. It's almost like it's supposed to feel crappy in taper so that it doesn't feel crappy on race day. Like that kind of thinking helps me in my mind, and I think helps a lot of athletes. Like, okay, this taper long run, like suddenly 12 miles feels like crap. Okay, good, because this isn't happening on race day. And there's a reason that it's feeling like crap, because my muscles and my body, they're working so hard to build that muscular system, to take all of that work that I did and make me stronger and make me a better athlete for race day. So be thankful that it doesn't feel 100%, that you're not peaking, that you're not feeling your greatest during that taper run, because more than likely your body is going to start to feel better as you come closer to race day, right? That's the whole point. Now, psychologically, it's a similar idea. We do have evidence to support that, like, increase of mood swings, increase of this, like, almost, I don't want to say negative, but like doubt creeps in.
Mhm.
And it's the same reasoning, right? It's like you just spent a really long time, you know 12, 16, 20 weeks of building for this particular race. So you have just the emotions of the amount of work that you've put in to get to one day, right? That's kind of, that's the beauty and the scariness about running as a sport, is like that's kind of how it is.
Mhm.
For anyone who doesn't know much about me, I used to play tennis, and like tennis is very different. Like you're playing tournaments every weekend, especially during season. So it's kind of easy to like lose a match, win a match, lose a match, win a, like it's a lot of ups and downs. This is a different type of sport, and that's why the taper is so important here, and the build is so important. But that all also makes for this psychological factor that's like, wait, I just spent all of this time. Am I losing my fitness? I don't believe in myself. I have doubt. Why does everything feel hard? All of those happen. I think it's important to recognize that it's normal. This is necessary to make sure that your fitness is at peak performance, that it's not a loss of fitness that's happening. I think just accepting that, like, yeah, this is a part of it. I'm going to get through it. And just going day by day is really important versus just like almost forcing yourself into the positive headspace, right? And not to say that being positive isn't helpful 100%. I think it's important to spend a certain period of time, especially during the taper, like visualizing positive experiences, visualizing yourself crossing the finish line, all of that good stuff. But also recognize, like, okay, I there might be some negative thoughts. We can sit with them for a second, but then let's move on. Right? That's something I learned in therapy, which has been very helpful for me, because the negative thoughts really flow, and it's almost like counterintuitive and not helpful for me to just like try and push them out.
Yep.
because then they end up coming back like during the race or something
Yep.
like that.
And
So
10 times bigger.
exact and 10 times bigger. So sit with them, let them happen, but then also remind yourself this is the purpose of these weeks, right? And you will get to the race day and hopefully in a much better, headspace by then.
Yeah. So just for clarity's sake,
Hmm.
people will not lose fitness during a taper, correct?
Correct. Correct. You don't lose fitness in like 2 or 3 weeks, especially after a build week. That's just not how it works. But here's one caveat to that is I wouldn't necessarily recommend like you hit peak week and then you just take 3 weeks off of running,
Okay. Yeah.
right? Like that's not really, I mean, look, I've seen people do it typically in like an injury specific situation, but maybe we're like subbing a little bit with cross training, all of that stuff. So not
Hmm.
entirely. However, I'm saying this under the impression that like you're still going to be running,
Yeah.
even if it's a less amount. So it's pretty impossible for you to lose the gains, especially if you're still having some level of maintenance. Now, if you were to, run your last long run and then 3 or 4 weeks later you run your race day and you don't run at all in between, there might be some level of fitness that is lost. Is everything lost? No. But that's not exactly what the taper is. So,
Yeah, that's why it was because you had said loss of fitness. And I was like, wait, I want to clarify that
yeah, that's a
just
good,
because
yeah,
I know I hear about loss of fitness, but it's usually within the context of you've taken time off
correct.
completely from
Correct.
all movement. So I just
Yeah.
wanted to make sure we clarified that there's a difference between tapering from your race but maintaining movement
Hmm.
versus tapering for your race but doing no movement at all, which you know
Yeah.
the taper, I think it's also something that's so highly individualized per
Hmm.
person and where they're at. But I was wondering if you, again, in your own personal professional experience, if you had to give people guidelines, like time guidelines for a taper for the 5K, 10K,
Yep.
half, and 26.2,
Yeah.
what would a taper, like how many days or weeks or
Yep.
whatever would you say for a 5K, to taper for a
Yeah.
5K?
I'd say the same thing for a 5K or a 10K would be like a few days to a week max of a taper.
Yeah.
For a half marathon, I would say 1 week to 2 weeks max. And then for the marathon, I would say 2 to 4 weeks max. I typically find like a sweet spot 2 to 3 weeks.
Hmm.
But there's a little bit more leeway as long as you are still running relatively frequently. But also, I think what's important to mention here too is maintain intensity too, right? Like, yeah, mileage cuts back, and your long runs aren't as long as they were in peak weeks, things like that. But that intensity can still remain as well, even to like week of, so that you can maintain some of that like ability to kind of power through. And that goes into the conversation of like losing fitness. Like, it's not like you're just cutting everything, right? There's kind of an art to it. But, nuance required. All of this changes if you're injured. So I have worked with a lot of athletes who like get injured in a peak week, and maybe we do take out intensity, and that's actually what helps you show up on race day feeling even better. So I just want to like, make this caveat that what I said is for the general uninjured runner. It's not necessarily exactly what I would follow for someone who is injured.
Yeah, and that's why I was like, it's so individual. And
So individual.
I think
Yeah.
of when I started running over a decade ago, that
Mm.
like the tapering was just a reduction in mileage. And I
Yeah,
feel like the research has changed so much where it's like, no,
totally.
even in your taper, you can still do your speed workouts. You're
Yep.
still doing that kind of intensity. As I try to explain to my athletes that when we're in a training cycle, we're working on two levels of intensity. One level
Hmm.
is increasing mileage, and the
Hmm.
other level is increasing
Yep.
workouts. So it's like we're working on different things of intensity because it's just taxing the body in a different way. So
Yep.
I love that that's changed because I find that that does help keep the confidence of
Mm.
maybe you're not doing, a 40-mile week. Perhaps you're down to like 30 or 35, but you still have those speed workouts in there to
Yes.
remind you that, okay, you've still got it. Because I think
Yes.
it is hard and it is a big mental shift because
Mm.
even if you have your down weeks
Mhm.
in training, it's not the same as like you're seeing it steadily
Right.
decline. Like
Yeah.
it's a different mental approach.
Yep.
Um, so that was the doubting ourselves, the I guess, what do you think of this term called taper crazies? What are your
Mm.
thoughts on that term?
Yeah.
Is it a good one? Does it capture what's
I think
going on?
so. I think it's quite accurate. I do. I'm a fan of something like that because I think it just helps people feel like, oh, yeah, there's a term for the way I'm feeling. Like this is not just me. I'm not alone in these thoughts. And look, like I've experienced and I've had athletes who've experienced like a taper where you actually don't feel like crazy or anything like that. Like you are just kind of going through the day and you feel good and no problem. Sure, that can happen too, but I think for a lot of people, like taper crazies is accurate. It's how it's that for can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, it's like this psychological shitstorm that's going on. Like it just again increased level of mood swings and all of that is very real and it's something that I'm sure the majority of us have experienced. So it's just like a common, term for the reality of the situation in my opinion.
So what is it that we should be doing during the taper to
Yeah.
help? That's something like I always think about it for myself whenever I start to get really anxious with training.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, there's going to be a taper and I'm going to be able to do all the things that I can't do. And then I just don't have the time to do it anyways.
Yeah.
Well, what are some of the things we should be focusing on in the taper to help kind of tone down the
Yeah.
crazy side of it?
Well, this might not tone down the crazy side of it, but I always think when I think of a taper, the most important thing that comes into my mind is nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think a lot of runners think, oh, not running as much. All right, like I guess I just won't eat as much. And I think it's deceptive too because endurance athletes, endurance sports have the ability to kind of skew our hunger cues, especially after peak weeks. When, if you think back to what I said is physiologically happening during taper, it is your muscles and your skeletal system trying to build, right? Trying to make you faster, make you stronger, make you run longer, basically accept all of the hard stimulus that you've given it. If you are not supporting it with proper nutrition and proper hydration and the appropriate amount of rest, you will not only will you not see those positive changes happening, you might actually see negative changes happening because what happens when you're actively trying to make a change, and I'll use a muscle, for example, just because it's easier to, I mean, it's very similar to bone as well, but when you're building and let's just go right down biophysiologically to what's happening in the muscle. Your muscle fibers, in order to create a stronger, more resilient muscle, those muscle fibers have to break apart, right? And then connect together in a stronger formation. That's, I mean, obviously a very low level
Simplistic.
explanation of it. But that's in essence what is happening, right? So if your muscle fibers, you spent all that time building, 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 you pushed it hard as you want to do in your peak weeks, you broke apart those muscle fibers. If you're not giving it the nutrition to come back into a stronger formation, that's directly putting you at risk for injury, right?
Hmm.
Because those muscle fibers, they're either going to come back together in a stronger formation or they're going to be injured, right? Or you're not going to see any adaptations at all, which is probably not what you want to see.
Mm-mm.
So, nutrition is the biggest piece. I also think, obviously, a carb load is important a couple days out, but I almost look at it myself, and I have a history of an eating disorder, so I find this helpful for me because my mind, if left to its own devices, it goes into restricting. So
Mm.
I think like, oh, 3 weeks of taper, my carb load starts for 3 weeks, right? Like that's how I look at it because mentally I'm like, okay, that's me saying I am still maintaining this high level of carbohydrates, of protein, of everything that my body needs to make me stronger. I am not basing it off of my mileage. I'm carb loading. Like in my eyes, that's how I see it. Obviously, it
Yeah.
goes up even further when the actual carb load starts, but that's a helpful way for me, myself to look at it. So that I don't, fall into maybe those thoughts that honestly has been like shaped by society for so freaking long because of diet culture. So I have to like counteract that. But I would say that's one of the most important things to consider during taper.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that because I
Yeah.
know that it for myself, right?
Yeah.
Whenever it's taper, I try to focus my taper on doing the things that show my body love. And
Yes.
it's in
Yes.
my case, it's usually like I try to go to more yoga classes or get
Love it.
massages done or take
Yep.
naps. Like those are the
Yeah.
things. But that is
Naps.
something that I think is often missed in the discussion of taper of how you do have to continue to fuel
To
yourself
fuel.
and to make sure
Yep.
you're getting your protein, your carbs, your
Yep.
hydration, because it
Yep.
is the taper period is that time. And this is to what you're saying, it is that time of prepping your body for
Yes.
peak performance, right? You
Yes.
spend all this time of training to it's almost like preparing your body and your mind to endure the
Yes.
distance. And taper is that time where you are preparing your body and mind to perform its best during the race. So I just want to say thank you so much for mentioning that because it is
Yeah.
so incredibly easy to fall down that thought
Oh,
pattern of I'm exercising less, so I need to eat less, where it's like, no, no, no. If we can kind of shift it of this is the time where you actually maybe not to say you shouldn't be paying attention to nutrition throughout the time,
right.
throughout the entirety of your training process, but perhaps this is the time where you are more mindful
Yes.
as how well you are taking care of yourself, how
Mhm.
well you are loving yourself. Because if I'm thinking like, if we're looking at a training cycle, and this is just super, super simplified, but if we're looking at, let's say, a 20-week training cycle, I think what you're talking about and what we're talking about with this taper is that you need those 3 weeks to integrate 17 weeks of work,
Yes. Yes.
right?
Exactly. Exactly. And when you put it like that, I think it's helpful to recognize like how important those 3 weeks are. Um, and kind of to your point, like the self-love is really what it's about there because again, I think some people might see that as like, oh, I'm not running as much. I'm going to, do X, Y, and Z. I'm going to fill my time. I'm going to do all of this. And it's like, how about like what you just said? How about just like nap? How about just like take a second and just be present and don't just fill that time because that's what's going to ultimately help you continue to recover. And I think on the same note that I mentioned, like nutrition is important, like sleep is just as
Mm-hmm.
important. Sleep, sleep, sleep. And that's something that I think can be a large source of anxiety for a lot of people. It's like, oh, but, and especially, if you have kids or if you have these responsibilities throughout the day, sometimes your sleep isn't
Mm-hmm.
um, top tier. But that's okay. But maybe in those 3 weeks, that starts to be a priority a little bit more.
Yeah, that's why I said naps because I
Yeah,
understand.
naps.
I have
Yeah.
kids and sometimes my
Yeah.
sleep at night is not the thing that's going to be great, but I can
Right.
fit in a nice like, 30
Yes.
to 45-minute nap that feels
Yeah.
completely rejuvenating.
Nap instead of that extra 30 to 45 minutes you would have spent running, right?
Correct.
So,
Correct.
yeah.
I want to go touch upon real quickly because, again, when I first started running, it
Mhm.
was you do your big race and then you take your 2 weeks of recovery time or whatever of recovery time. But there really was no guideline as to like how to rebuild again up
Yeah.
until I learned this term a couple of years ago, a few years ago, whatever, at some point in the past, reverse tapering.
Mm. Okay.
Have
Yeah.
you? So I'm sure.
I've heard of the term. I'm not sure I'm the biggest fan. I don't know. Maybe I'm just like not I haven't been explained it properly or I've seen like misleading posts on social media. But what I see, I guess, and I'm not sure, correct me if I'm not answering this in or answering your question correctly, but I don't like the term reverse taper because it kind of implies that like, oh, you're just kind of gonna kind of like after the race, you're gonna build up the way that your taper built down. When in reality, like you should probably just take some time off. Like I don't do the 2 miles, 4 miles, 6 miles, 8 miles, like kind of that reverse. And again, I'm probably uh miscommunicating what reverse taper actually is, but just in case anyone is interpreting it in that way,
Mhm.
I wouldn't, right? I would be like, okay, maybe you take a week, 2 weeks off, and then you start a reverse taper, but you can't, like, I wouldn't do it without the first 1 or 2 weeks completely off. And this is under the assumption that this race was a goal race. You've tapered for peak performance and you've run the race. Even if it went your way or not, it was still a big effort, take some time off. Don't just start running again. So am I like
No,
misinterpreting
no,
it?
no,
Yeah.
because I think
Yeah.
there's two camps, I feel like, of the
Hmm.
reverse taper, right?
Mm.
Reverse taper, you have the one camp where it's like you do your race and then you slowly build your mile back up. The
Hmm.
reverse taper that I like is the you take your
Time
recovery.
off. Yeah.
Take your recovery
Yeah.
and then
And then you come back. Yes,
rebuild,
slowly.
but it's more of like I always like to, I mean, I love time-based runs. So I'm
Yeah.
always like when we come back, we're coming back with
Yes.
30-minute runs. And then
Yes.
that feels good. We bump up to
Unstructured.
45-minute runs.
Yep.
And then
Yep.
exactly, it's like I'll tell my athletes they're on the schedule,
Right.
but do what you want.
Do them on a Wednesday if it says it's on a Tuesday, right? Like,
Exactly.
yeah.
And like
Yeah.
I'm more
Yeah.
concerned with you making sure you have recovery time between your running
Exactly.
efforts than
Yeah.
following what I put exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the reverse taper that I like where it's like, okay, let's slowly build up using time-based runs. And if things are feeling good, then okay, let's hop into more mileage-based runs because in my
Yeah.
opinion, those two are they just different mental processes between
Totally.
time based versus mileage based. It messes with people in different ways.
I totally agree. I also don't think people realize that if you went out and raced your marathon, half marathon, whatever it is, and you raced it at the level you want to race, which doesn't mean you necessarily got your goal time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Factored in weather, all of that type of stuff, or whatever else could have happened on that day. But let's say you went out and you had a solid effort, your body is going to recover for like 3 or 4, even 5 weeks after
Yep.
that, right? Like your body is still recovering. And I hear this from so many people. The most athletes that I work with at least are like generally okay with taking a full week off after a marathon, which
Yeah.
I'm happy about. I would say into that second week is when it starts to get dicey. Some
Mm-hmm.
people are like, yeah, I'll take 2 weeks. Some people are like, where's my structure? Like, I need
Yeah.
my structure back. And it's so important. And this is why I like what you said about the time-based running and kind of switching that up a little bit. But it's so important to recognize that even if you feel quote unquote recovered a week after week off, your body is probably not. And in terms of injuries and injury risk, your injury risk remains high for 3+ weeks, right? So, really important to make sure that you're aware of that. And that's my biggest issue with multiple times, racing a marathon multiple times a year. I think 2 or 3 times is fine. I think over that, like, where's the time?
Yeah.
There's no time to do that if your periodization is appropriate. And then it kind of comes full circle when we're talking about periodization again, because you want to actively, this is another important point. After the race, you want to actively lose fitness
Yeah.
because you actively put yourself in peak performance. And in order to reach that peak performance again for that next one, you can't just maintain. You have to lose it, because if you just try and maintain it, you run the risk of plateauing, which I know people actually hate that more than like the
Yeah.
idea of injury risk. The
Yep.
the worst thing you can tell them is like, you're going to plateau if you just keep going. You can't run on empty, right? Purposefully spend the time to lose that fitness so that when it's time to build again, you have the energy to do so and you haven't depleted yourself from the beginning.
Yeah,
So,
that's something I wish I knew when I first started running, because
same.
I
Yeah.
thought it was like, oh my gosh, after my PR races, I was like, yes, I have this new fitness unlocked. I didn't understand
Yes.
that, like, hey, remember you tapered and like you created
That
conditions for that fitness. It's not like it's not a stepping stone in a linear fashion. It's like, okay,
totally.
this is what's possible, but it's
Yeah.
what's possible because you've done all this stuff to prepare your body
Yes.
for that possibility. It's not like you do it and then you unlock an entirely new door. You don't, because
Mhm.
again, to what we were saying earlier, right? Like that loss of fitness, the tapering, like this is all part of the process of
Yeah.
being a runner. And it's to me, running is such a dance where it's like we have to pull back, we have to lose in order to launch forward, in order
Mhm.
to unlock something new in ourselves,
Mhm.
because it's also just, oh my gosh, maintaining peak fitness just sounds exhausting
It is.
as well.
Look, I'm sitting here in May when we're recording this podcast, and I literally made this mistake this past year, earlier this year. Like, I went from half marathon to half marathon, having these very specific goals into a marathon training season, and I got injured because I didn't respect the amount of work I was putting in for the half marathon. I ended up PRing my half marathon, great, but I hadn't taken a full week off after it. I'd taken a couple days here and there. I was kind of like, I'm feeling great. I want to capitalize on this fitness that I built.
Mhm.
And I did too much. And I learned, right? And I knew it was better, but I was kind of in this headspace where I'm like, oh, I feel good. I'm excited, all of these things. But when I look back, the season of time that I'd given myself to be at this peak was way too long. It was way too long. And I should have been a little bit more strategic. And I think, again, this comes back again, like full circle to what we were talking about. That's what I've been struggling with a social media presence, and constantly feeling like I have to, like, I don't know about you, but my posts do better when I race,
Oh,
right? Like,
absolutely.
training for actually showing up to a race, like those posts blow up. So in my mind, it's kind of like, great, like it's almost like a business thing.
Yeah.
Well, business has a way of burning you out really quick. And that's, all came down to it. And I got injured and couldn't run the marathon that I was scheduled for. So I say this to say, like, it's really easy for me to sit here and feel like I'm lecturing people on, like, you're not doing it right. But in reality, like, I make these mistakes too. I think it's just an important reminder, like, it's real. Rest needs to happen. Losing fitness needs to happen. Even to the best of us, it has to happen. Even to the, physical therapists who feel like, you think they'll never get injured. We're human too. So it's just a reminder for everyone.
Yeah. I mean, it's part of, unfortunately, fortunately, however you see it, right? Like it's part of being a human, it's part of being an
Yeah,
active human, is that we're gonna learn one way
exactly.
or another. And
Yep.
there's only so much our bodies can give. And
Yep.
I have this saying where I say our body whispers until it screams. And it's that your
Yes.
body's going to tell you, hey, I need you to kind of pull back. And if you're not listening, your body's going to scream with an injury, and that's it. You have no choice. Right.
Yeah.
So it happens. But
Yep.
Yeah, we're human and we get caught up in it too. We get caught up in our
Yep.
goals and wanting to improve. I get it. Like
Yeah.
it truly is a very challenging balance because it's what is our identity and
Mm-hmm.
how does that identity connect to or relate to these performances that we
Exactly.
so all right,
Exactly.
Victoria, I have three final questions for you. They're kind of quick.
Yes.
So first question is, where can we find you and how can we better connect with you?
Yes, I'm on Instagram and TikTok at Train Smart Run Strong, and my website is trainsmartrunstrong.com. Very easy to find me.
What are you excited about when it comes to yourself as a coach, as a physical therapist, as a runner over the next few months?
I'm honestly really excited about the fact that, well, I just want to say, I've talked about the injury on this podcast already. I'm very proud of myself for listening to my injury, for pulling it back, because now I'm at the stage where I'm getting back into speed workouts. I'm feeling the groove again. I'm kind of moving past that. So I am very excited that I actually like listened, took some time, didn't follow the calendar exactly to plan because I'm kind of a type A person and I probably would have chosen that had I not, had a better sense of it. So just excited for the next couple months to rebuild and see what happens from there.
I love that. The
Yeah.
setback always allows for a comeback, and
Yeah,
there's lessons in
100%.
it.
What is it? The comeback is greater than the setback.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and I think another important lesson that not that I've learned, but I've had to remind myself, and I feel like it's a good reminder for a lot of athletes who have been injured or have taken time off of running, it can feel scary to pull back because again, like scary to lose fitness,
hmm
scary to be at this place where you have built so much. And in my, at least in my experience, I was, fresh off of a half marathon PR, running, feeling phenomenal, all of that stuff. So it can be really scary to pull back on that. But the most important thing to remember is that, again, you have to pull back in order to rebuild and get back to where you want to be. And if you've been there before, it's easier to get back to that level. It's not like
yeah,
you have to do it over the first time. So I think both of those are important and it kind of gives you a little bit of hope because it can also be scary. Like I was doing, all of these really crazy speed workouts and now I'm back to like 5 times 1 minute repeats, with 3 minute jog recovery, like right back to the basics. But it'll click again. It'll click again. And it's always easier if you've been there before.
yeah.
So,
And I think it's also just if you're a part of the sport for a long time, it's almost like
yes,
injuries and setbacks are inevitable. Like
they're
if
part
you're
of it.
running, yeah, it's like
100%.
it's just
Yeah.
part of it.
Yeah.
Um, all right, final question is what are your final words for us?
Oh, my final words for you are remember to not lose sight of your why, of the joy. Um, it's fun to have goals. It's great to have goals, but if those goals separate you too much from your original reason for doing something, the joy that it brings you, don't be afraid to reevaluate. Don't be afraid to not run the race that you had planned to run,
Hmm
right? Don't be afraid to just kind of strip it back down to the roots of it because I always find that that's what keeps you in it longer. So, yeah.
Thank you. And with
Yes.
that said, we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Bye.